Welcome to It's Interesting You Say That, a Bounce Back Generation podcast. I would like to talk about anxiety. Have you ever had an anxiety attack
Yes,
lately?
not so much lately, but when my wife and I first found out she was pregnant,
Oh,
I thought I was I thought I was going to have a heart attack. And so after maybe 6 months of having these anxiety attacks, I went in for tests. I did the whole thing, got hooked up, did the treadmill test, everything. They said, nope, you're fine. Everything's good. And my doctor finally told me, like, it's probably just anxiety, which was a relief.
yeah.
But there's no pill for it.
Well,
It-
there are pills for it, actually.
I was not willing to take a pill for it,
Right.
I'll say. But why'd you bring that up?
Because I have suffered from anxiety my whole life. And I have learned, like probably in my 30s, late 30s, I really learned how to manage anxiety. But I feel it coming up again a little bit. And I'm not sure why. I think a lot of times we think of I think of anxiety as just like, oh, there's something wrong with my head. I'm making anxiety come up. But I think there's a lot of physical reasons why anxiety can come up, like low blood sugar, or you're really tired, or there's a imbalance. Like I've gone through menopause, so there's all this like hormonal imbalance stuff that happens, and so. But I'm trying to remember a lot of the tools that I used to reduce anxiety. And the thing is it just like the feeling of it started to rise up again. Like I started to feel that feeling. And it's such a familiar feeling but the thing is when I first started getting anxiety attacks, I was maybe 12, 13, 14 years old. And I didn't know what it was. Just like what you were describing. I'm going to ask you, describe to me what your anxiety attack felt like.
Like it hurt to breathe. Like for me, it was in my chest. And so I'd breathe in and it felt like my blood vessels were going to pop. And so like every deep breath I took, it was like, have you ever put on like wax on your face or like a face mask that dries?
Mm-hmm.
And so like when you move your face, like it all cracks and like you can feel it all over. That's what it felt like, but just in my chest and painful. Like it was
Mm-hmm.
just like creaking and cracking, expanding. And like I couldn't breathe.
Yeah. Did you mentally feel anything?
No. And that's why I didn't think it was stress or anxiety, because mentally I was like, I'm fine. I have
Mm.
everything handled, which I didn't. But so it was just manifesting just purely physically, which was a really new thing for me. I knew the brain body connection, but I didn't think it was, I thought, yeah, there's a brain body connection, but it's not that serious.
Yeah. But it's real, right?
It is.
Well, my anxiety attacks were both physical, where I would feel like my hands would get cold, maybe a little bit like feel like I was a little bit like clammy, sweaty. Yeah, breathing, like my breathing would get shallow. But the main thing for me is I would also get very disassociated. So I would suddenly be seeing everything just in this weird, like everything was very stark or far away or too close, like my perception felt really off. And so, but I would, at the same time, continue talking, continue acting normally while I was going through it. It wasn't like, I'm having an anxiety attack. I would be like inside my head having an anxiety attack, but I'd be like, oh yeah, how are you doing today? Blah, blah, blah. And so it was very, very weird, and definitely made me feel like I was like, oh, I'm crazy, because there's this like part of me that's normal and inside is completely like bouncing off the walls. And so I went to a doctor. He said, oh, you have low blood sugar and you should eat all the time, which was not good to say to me. But yeah. And then over the years, so that was really the first time you ever got an anxiety attack? You never had one before or after?
Well, you know what is very when I was a teenager, or maybe late teens, kind of like last year of high school, early college before I dropped out, I was smoking a lot of weed, and it's very similar to I had those feelings when I would smoke weed, just like everything's overwhelming. I feel like I can't
Oh,
breathe, and then that's actually one of the reasons I ended up stopping. But
yeah,
without
same
the weed,
here.
having that
Yeah, could
feeling,
not.
it was it was scary not knowing what it was. I think that was probably the scariest part, and not knowing how to solve it. Like I tried becoming a
Hmm.
vegan. I tried working out every day. Like I feel like I threw the book at it. But it was like I was trying to find a solution for something that like I didn't even know what it was. And that made it worse.
So okay, so the vegan and doing all that, that was when you were having anxiety about your wife being pregnant?
I thought if I changed my diet,
Hmm.
if I, which I went vegan, and just because I wasn't eating animal products did not mean I was eating healthy. So it actually was worse for my health just because I didn't go into it too strategically. But yes, I tried to. Now that you mention it, though, there was this mental component where I would always have this dream that I was running from something. I was running from something, but like I couldn't ever move faster.
Hmm.
Like the thing was right behind me, but and like I'd be trying my hardest, but I just keep going the same pace. And I think now, kind of thinking back on it, well, we were living at my parents'. My wife was pregnant. I didn't exactly have the business set up yet. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do.
Huh.
And I was just scrambling to figure everything out.
Wow.
And it just felt like I couldn't go fast enough. And I think the anxiety was just because, in a very real sense, I had to get things together very quickly. And I didn't feel like, it's not like I didn't think I was equipped, because I had a lot of confidence. I had a lot of arrogance. But I think deep down, that confidence was a mask because I actually didn't know what to do. And then that anxiety kind of emerged from that.
Yeah. I think I have observed with people that I know, um, and I think this is borne out in the literature, that a lot of times the way that we respond to anxiety is to try to control something in our lives, So, and food being a big one, that maybe if I controlled what I eat or when I eat or how I eat, that will keep anxiety at bay, now because I know for a couple people that I know that have had eating disorders, what they have said is that the one thing that they could control in their life at that time when they were having the anxiety was what they were eating or how they were eating. And that led to, they could see it like, oh, I can not eat for 3 days. And that's something I have whole control over. Because I do think anxiety is about that, like things that are out of control, and I always, so I continued to have anxiety attacks. I lived in Los Angeles and I had anxiety attacks every time I got on a freeway, which is terrible. LA. Like you can't live without getting on a freeway in LA. And then when I moved back up here, I had anxiety attacks going on bridges. And what I did was I just stopped driving on bridges, and my boyfriend at the time would be like every time we had to drive on the bridge, I was like, you have to drive because I'm not driving over this bridge. I'm not going to be the one actually, on the steering wheel because I don't think I could make it. And so I think anxiety is just a big thing that a lot of people deal with and number one, don't know what they're experiencing, because your experience of anxiety is different than my experience. And I think everybody has a different experience of anxiety. For some people, it might be trying to control something, maybe getting OCD about something, but I have to make sure that and I know people like this too. I have to make sure that all my pens face this way all the time, or my money, when I put my money in, it has to, be stacked a certain way. little things like that that help us to feel like we're in control. And I feel like we're living through a time. I don't know if you feel like this, but I do. I feel like we're living through a time right now where things feel very chaotic, at least to me. I mean, do you feel like that, or are you pretty like, hey, the world's going okay? I mean, I know you don't think the world's going okay, but you're not. Will you tell me? What do you?
I think it's a little scary with everything going on. It's very difficult to not know what's going to happen, to not have perceived stability with the way the world is going. And for me, it makes it very difficult to then try to plan what I'm going to do.
Yeah, I mean, do you, I mean, I have so many questions about what I should be doing for money, what I should be doing about where to live, and a lot of it is colored by the the feelings that I have that, for example, I feel like the economy is going to really be bad this year, like 2025. I don't feel great about the economy, even though I know a lot of people felt like, oh, the economy in the past few years has been terrible because of inflation. I feel like, yeah, that was bad, but there was a reason and it was kind of getting better. And I feel like something is very, uh, there's a weakness in our economy that is about to really just collapse. And I'm not an economist. I don't have anything more than just a feeling, right? And then I wonder about climate and I look at what's happening in Los Angeles and it makes me feel like there's nowhere safe um, from climate change. Like, where do you go? And then, of course, the politics side of things, I feel like is very unstable, weird, very strange. And then I think that the global situation, as we've talked about, is also very anxiety producing because it's very painful to watch what happens in other countries and other people. I mean, I feel a lot for the suffering that people that come as immigrants that walk across, from Central America, walk all the way up here, only to be turned back around or and they can't stay where they are, or they are just normal people just like anybody who wants to make a better life for their families, and they live in constant state of uncertainty of what's going to happen. I mean, it's just very, when you look at the big picture, of course, I mean, I feel I should be more anxious maybe, or I don't know. It's a very unsettling feeling, and I think my anxiety is not coming back, but it still lingers, and I do have tools now to deal with it, but it doesn't feel like, I think when I was younger, my anxiety was much more about deep hidden stuff in me that had happened in me that I hadn't processed. And I think now my anxiety is based on the outside world, you know, coming in.
So what are you doing to stay, I guess, to cope with it?
Well, there's a couple of things that I learned about how to handle anxiety just in that immediate moment when I feel it rising up. And the number one thing, and it sounds like weak and everything, but it really, really helps me at least, is breathing. Just paying attention that my breath is normalized, and then recognizing I'm starting to feel anxious and then not going to, oh my God, what's going to happen next? Because that for me was the anxiety attack would come up, and then I would immediately imagine I'm going to drive off of this bridge, or I'm going to say something like completely weird and no one's going to understand me, or I'm like lost in this state of fear and I can't get out of it. And so just talking to myself as I breathe and saying, everything's okay. You're just starting to feel anxious, but right now, like really getting in the moment and saying, everything is okay right now. So, and then talking to myself so that the voices or the images in my head of what the bad things were going to happen were distracted by the me talking to myself saying, everything's all right. You're going to be okay. You know?
So after you weather that initial storm, like, what are the next things that you tend to do?
So a lot of it is so I do a number of different things. One is I try to, just like, am I eating well? Am I getting enough sleep? Am I giving myself time off? I tend to be somebody who's very active all the time and, always thinking, always moving, always doing something. And so I need to force myself to stop and do nothing. Like, okay, I have a day of nothing. Maybe I'll do some laundry, that kind of thing. And really putting boundaries around myself because there's always somebody like, hey, do you want to do this? Or I want to, let's set up a call. I haven't talked to you in a while, things like that. And me being able to say, you know what, I can't this day. But I can, let's do it another day or something. Um, then I think a lot of what I do is, and I've talked about this before, is I meditate, definitely meditate. One of the things that we've gotten for Bounce Back Generation is this company down in Palm Springs. They do sound baths. So I actually started doing the sound. They gave us sound bath sounds to use, just a portion of them because they're very long. They're like 45 minutes long. But the sound baths are amazing for just calming your brain and your body. So you just put the headphones on and listen to them, and it's, I don't know, something for me that really works. Meditation for sure. And then I do tarot card readings for myself. I don't feel like I don't do tarot card readings because I think tarot cards are going to tell me the future. I do them because they give me a sense of they're just like archetypes, right? Like, the tower is disaster, and the queen of pentacles is about, managing your money, and they all just have like symbols, right? And so if you do it for me, if I do a tarot card reading, it gets me to think about certain aspects of my life that I might not be thinking about normally. And that really helps. And then I journal, I'll kind of write things down. One thing I used to do that really helped that I haven't done in a long time is I would meditate, and then I would just immediately like write when I came out of the meditation, because I would have all these like really great thoughts about stuff, and I can't even explain what they are. But sometimes they're almost poetry. They're just like a few words here and there, but they were very valuable to help me to get out of those states of mind and that state of being. And there were periods of time where I was just anxious, 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 and then managing, anxious, managing, anxious, managing for years. I think through my 30s, that's how I lived, and it was very hard. Um, and yeah, and I think now I just have much better grip on how to handle it. It does get better.
So after you manage it, so you breathe, you I guess it sounds like you kind of take a break. You kind of pause things that, are at least aren't life or death, and you get your mind on something else. You slow down a little bit.
Yeah.
And then going from there, is it like the anxiety is gone and you're back to life? Or is it like or is it like you're back to life but the anxiety is still there? Or what's that like for you, that transition?
Well, I think it's different at different stages in life. I think, when I was younger, I was more like, okay, I gotta pay my rent, and I've gotta, finish school, and then I have to, or if I was, working my career, I had to make sure I got things done. And as I'm now getting older, it's more about what is my quality of life right now, and how can I do that? And it's more about like the building block of protection. How can I protect myself? How can I protect myself financially, emotionally, creating just barriers around myself so that there's like a thicker soft wall between the world and me. And that takes some thinking. I mean, it's little things like uh being in nature, making sure I go out in nature, make sure I get exercise, making sure that I talk to people who make me feel good about my life and about myself. Um, Reading stuff like, poetry or philosophy, things like that, that just change my mindset. What about you? Or do you feel like you have that structure set up for yourself?
I think I still get anxious,
Hmm.
probably just honestly, to some extent, at least every day. Like usually it's not, the world's crashing down, but I think it fluctuates every day. But I do the same thing when I start to feel it or becomes a little too intense. I think the first thing I try to do is breathe, um, and just let that initial kind of spike of anxiety just settle. But the next thing I do, I have to do something. So
Mhm.
I have to work out. I have to do chores. I have to I know I always say this, but I have to mow the lawn. It just feels like, I think my anxiety always comes from not doing enough, or like there's more I should
Yeah.
be doing, or there's more I should be doing to kind of figure out the uncertainty.
Yeah.
So if I'm not keeping up with everything and I slow down too much, then I'm not going to see, the thing coming down the field, or like if you're playing football, like I'm not going to see the thing about to come tackle me.
Mhm.
And so for me, it's kind of reverse. So I have to do a whole bunch of stuff first. Like I'll go do the laundry, I'll clean, I'll do some work, I'll mow the lawn. And then after I feel like those little things are done, then that gives me kind of like a sense of like, okay, like, my immediate world is in order. And then it's like, I need to take a break. Now I need to sit on the couch. I need to not do anything. I need to not think about anything.
Yeah. But that action is part of it. And but the problem is sometimes the action that you take as a result of anxiety is more of the spinning, more of the like, oh, I'm gonna like this is gonna, and there's a different energy when you say I'm got anxiety and I'm just gonna take care of stuff the way that I know I can take care of stuff, but I'm not going to do it with this sense of dire urgency. Like you're not going to be, in that dream running and getting nowhere. You're jogging along and you're doing what you need to do, and that's lowering your anxiety because you can only do what you can do. And I think anxiety is like forces us to think about being this super person that can accomplish everything. Why aren't you like that? Why can't you drive across this bridge, or why can't you handle, smoking weed, with your friends? Like everybody else is having fun and you're in your head going, oh my God, I can't, and I think maybe there's a personality portion to being anxious, but I don't know. I don't know if everybody gets anxious and then handles it by getting calm and sorting things out, or if there's a certain portion of the population that gets, which I think I'm in, that gets anxious and then goes spinning from the anxiety, which is what I've had to learn how to stop. But it sounds like you have a pretty good, calm way of addressing your anxiety.
It took me, yes, because I know if I'm anxious and I do the laundry, like no one's going to get hurt. Like if I get anxious and I'm in a cleaning frenzy,
Right.
as long as like I'm not taking it out on the kids or my wife, and like I'm relatively calm about it and I'm not messing up their routine and their day, then everybody's laundry is done and folded and put up.
Yeah.
And whereas before, when I was first like really trying to deal with anxiety, probably when I was a teenager, it was like go out, like go get some weed, go drink, go party, go like
Yeah.
distract yourself from the anxiety. It was like spinning in an unproductive way.
Yeah.
And I think I think probably when I got married and when the kids came, then it was like I still have this energy and I have to do something with it. Like I just have to. But let me try to make it productive. So at least if I'm spinning out, like I can spin out in my head, things can get done. And then when I see the house clean and I see the kids are good and my wife is going about, her stuff, then I'm like, okay, now's my time to everything's done and nothing is needed from me.
Mm-hmm.
Because what I don't want to do is, for me, I think depression can be worse
Yeah. Yeah.
because then I stop doing things. And, with the kids, there's always something that needs to be done and
Yeah.
their emotions need to be regulated. So if I stop and things aren't done and then things start piling up, then it's like, then the anxiety will kick in like tenfold.
Yeah.
So if I can kind of say, like, whether I'm anxious or I'm depressed, like, okay, there's laundry, there's cleaning, there's a little bit of work. Maybe you just do the bare minimum today, but get it done so you can take the time you need to address the bigger issues.
Yeah. I mean, it's nice to hear that you don't take your anxiety out on your kids, because as somebody who well, a lot of kids in my generation, and I'm sure happened today even, we were the I don't want to say the punching bag, but sometimes the punching bag for the anxiety of adults. Um and so you kind of learn how to model that when I'm anxious, a great way to handle it is to get it out on other people, which is a lot of where anger comes from, where that triggered anger is really just a cover for anxiety. So like, and I'll see this sometimes. We may have talked about this. Like you'll see a video online of, like somebody acting like a Karen or something. And what you see really, even like, and especially under some of the racial stuff, I feel like a lot of that racial stuff that comes out on, like, why are you here? You're blah, 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 how people talk, how some of those videos are. And it's really about race. And I feel like there is such fear for a lot of people about how that race is going to be more, is going to be equal to me. And I can't let them get away with that, or they're going to have more than me. And I can't let them get away with that. And so they use anger as a way to cover up over that anxiety about losing their place in the hierarchy. And it comes out in these petty little ridiculous things that you see all the time, that people are like, what is wrong with that person? How could they get so crazy in Starbucks over the fact that, the the Mexican looking girl wrote her name down wrong? Why is that such a big deal? Because anxiety rose up in them, and about you're not respecting me enough. You're not deferent. You should know my name, or you should write it right. You should, whatever the issue is. And I think that's a sign of not being able to recognize where that fear is coming from. And I think for me, a lot of the anxiety when I was younger, and I suspect for a lot of young people, is you don't know where that fear is coming from. Like you were able to identify it. Oh, my wife is having our first child. I've never been a father before. I'm anxious. And so I'm feeling it in my body and I'm expressing it. But I think a lot of young people and older people don't know where that fear is coming from. And that's where I think the triggers come in, that people don't really understand how triggers work.
What you said about the Karens, by no means have I always been, and am I not now, like dealing with my anxiety the best when it comes to the kids. I think especially when they were first born and they need everything from you. How, maybe not like you're going to take my place in the hierarchy, but like you're going to stop me from getting the time that I need.
Yes.
Um, you're going to stop me from doing the things that I want, or like I'm losing my identity because of you. And it can be very easy. Well, for me, it could be very easy to start almost resenting them. And I've never been a very violent person, but when I get like that, or I get anxious, or I get fearful, or like I'm going to have to take so much time to take care of you in this tantrum that I'm not going to be able to go work or have the energy to do this. And then I'm not going to be able to take care of you.
Right. Right.
And I can get but I don't act like that. I can get very cold and just very distant and very, like, if I do say something, it can be very sharp.
You say scary, like scary Tyler comes out.
And that version of me does not come out when I am successfully dealing with my own stuff or my anxiety. And a lot of the time my wife has had to come in and say, like, a little bit of an overreaction there. Like, or like, what's going on, because he just spilled a glass of milk. And and you always, I feel like I always know, like when I say something or I'm being too distant, like I always know when I have the wrong reaction. And that can cause even more anxiety because now it's like now it becomes like a mess. So
Yeah.
now like there was one thing and now there's this thing and now I'm spreading it. And I think that's why most of the time I just try to like do the laundry or do something because like it feels like sometimes there's a fire going on. And then if I'm not careful, like I could put gas on the fire and then like now I have to put out much more than I would have if I had just, did the laundry.
Yeah.
And so yes, in a way I have found some decent ways to deal with my anxiety, but it's still not perfect. And I think now what I have to do, in addition to kind of doing my chores or doing whatever I do, I have to tell my wife or I have to tell my kids, like, I don't want to play right now, or like, I don't want to talk right now, or I need space right now. And it feels like a very adult thing to say to a 3-year-old, but they understand. And 9 times out of the 10, they just go off and do their thing.
Okay. You're right. Don't take it personally. Yeah.
And no feelings are hurt. I don't know. Like if I just ignore, like if they want to play and instead of just saying like, hey, I'm not in the mood to play, I don't say anything. I just
Mm-hmm.
walk away, or like I go to the room, and then they're left with a feeling of like, what the heck just happened? Was it me? Like what's going on? And they're 3, so they're not. This is just like, it's like chaos, like immediate. Something's wrong. Something's bad. Maybe it was me. Like
Yeah.
I don't know what to do. Whereas if I just say like, hey, not in a good mood,
Mm-hmm.
and he's like, okay, dad's not in a good mood, go to mom,
Yeah.
or or go do something else, and everybody understands.
That's
It's so
very
much
good though.
easier.
You're modeling something that they can emulate later, which is being able to say, here's where my boundaries are right now, and there's things I can handle right now and things I can't, and and sending that message that it's not you, don't take it personally, which is very difficult for kids because kids tend to think that they're responsible for everything. And there's an important kind of psychological lesson in that we as much as it hurts to think that we're the ones who are responsible for someone else's feelings or behavior, it's it's a way to feel control over something that you don't have control over. And so it can be very damaging over time. Like a lot of kids, for example, think that if their parents get divorced, that it's something that they did. And it's very difficult to say, or like adopted kids sometimes will say, well, I wasn't lovable, so that's why they gave me up for adoption. And it's like, this had nothing to do with you as a human person, as an entity. There are other circumstances around it that had nothing to do with you. That as children, to think that I don't have control over something is sometimes more scary than I do have control over it. It is my So I think what you're doing is really great because you're modeling for the kids how to set those boundaries. But I think what you're exhibiting is a lot of self-awareness. Like, yourself enough to say, here's where I'm headed or here's where I'm at, and this is what I need to do to handle it. You're not experiencing that anxiety coming up and then going and, kicking all the doors down, right? Or screaming at them. So how did you get that sense of self-knowledge and self-awareness?
By kicking all the doors down and burning bridges and realizing like over time it just now there's just more to clean up now.
Yeah.
And now I'm even more mad, I'm even more anxious. And so I think the self-awareness arose from like a more intense feeling than, or a more intense anxiety than the anxiety that there was to start with. And just ask, like, then the question kind of arose, like, why am I more angry now?
Yeah.
And
Why do you
just
think you are more angry?
Well, in the moment, I think when I was first trying to figure it out, it was like, why am I more angry, or like, why am I more anxious? And I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew that things were worse.
Yeah.
So there was no coping strategy. There was no like gradual, like, oh, like I am suddenly aware of everything that's wrong with me. It was just like, things are worse now. And then if I go for a week from now, like things are worse now. And then like on the extreme end, like going from a year and like, wow, things are really, really bad.
Yeah.
And then just kind of finally just saying like, well, why? And like, I think the anger is still there. The anxiety is like everything in a funny, ironic way. All the emotions that I was feeling at that point when I was just figuring out are still here. Like I'm probably still, I still get just as angry as I used to. I still get just as anxious, just as depressed. Unfortunately, I wish I could say like I no longer feel those, or like I'm not
Mhm.
depressed anymore. I'm not anxious anymore. But this is not true. I just know, I just over time and after getting stung quite a few times, I've just learned how to deal with it better. So if nothing else, it doesn't compound.
Yeah.
And I would say like it is better, but the main reason being because like I'm not making it worse.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like, if you were to have a chart, like before I would get anxious and it would be like anxiety peak, and then boom, then I get depressed and really confused and feel really terrible, and then anxiety peak. And now it's more like, oh, little anxiety, oh, little depression. It's just a smoother curve than it used to be. But one of the things about self-awareness that I have really learned is that you have to understand what the triggers are for you. And it's so I think there are like layers to triggers. So the trigger might be I got really anxious because somebody talked to me a certain way, or I was expecting that people would like what I did and they didn't like it, or um, I wore that outfit and people thought it didn't look right, whatever. So there's just something that triggered the anxiety. And I would think that it's about that. Well, people didn't like X, Y, or Z, so that triggers my anxiety. But actually, it's about an even deeper thing. Like even under that, there might be something deeper. Like I never felt like people recognized the things that I did, or I never felt totally loved for who I am, or whatever it is. And then you go deeper than that, and you keep finding these kind of layers of things that um, that that eventually trigger you when this little tiny thing happens. Like, and I always use, when I would do the teachings, I would use the idea of like a black hat. So if somebody treated you terribly one day and they had a black hat on, now the black hat imagery is in your head subconsciously, because that's how our brains are built, that you're going to be you're when something hurts you, threatens you, your the part of your brain that feels fear communicates to the part of your brain that has the memory and says, beware of that if it ever happens again, because it's your brain's all about trying to keep you safe. And so you can now later on, 15 years later, walk into a room and someone's wearing a black hat, and suddenly you get an anxiety attack and you don't even know why, because your brain has registered the black hat before the part of your brain is registering it and sending fear signals going off like crazy. But you're just like, oh, I'm at this party and I don't know why I'm feeling anxious. Maybe have social anxiety, just general social anxiety. Well, maybe it's because of that black hat that hasn't even registered in your conscious mind, from here going to here, right? And I think if people understood that, it would really help them to not to understand just themselves, to have that self-awareness and to start delving into those deeper layers of what is it about certain situations that make me feel anxious. And I think that's something that should be done with a professional if it's something really intense. Um, but yeah, I mean, what do you think about that?
The one of the hardest things for me that I think I'm just kind of uncovering maybe this last year is that even when you get to those conclusions or you uncover those connections, they can be very easily forgotten.
Mhm.
It's like your brain has so much space. It's always occupied by, the future, the past, the present. There's all this information going around. And when you come upon like a nugget of good information, like, oh, like this is why I do that, or that's why I do this, or this is what I need to do. Like those get added into your memory bank, but with so much information churn, or like so many new things happening, so many other connections, like if you don't keep those things present, the like the symptoms of not knowing those things or the unawareness or the behaviors that you did when you were unaware will just come back because they've gone back to your unconscious.
Yeah.
And so a big thing for me has been remembering these things, not in a way that I'm ruminating on the past or trying to like overthink these lessons, but stay aware of them by, for me, it's a lot of, I have to go on walks, I have to work out, I have to do the chores. And that gives me space for the important things, or like meditation, like let the noise fade and the important things kind of come back into my mind. Or working with a professional, or if you have someone that you can talk to, like just keeping those conversations going.
Mhm.
Because if you get to that conclusion, like, and this is kind of cliche, but we all go through these cycles. Like we go through these relationship cycles, and we go through these cycles with bad habits, and like they'll come back and we'll get better, and they'll come back and they'll get better. And I think you have to go through that. But if you're really making progress, those cycles might still happen, but they should be getting better, or you should
Yeah.
spend less time in them.
Mhm.
And I don't think there's a way to do that other than first getting that awareness,
Mhm.
but then like keeping those lessons within your awareness,
Yeah.
which for me at least is the more difficult part. Like I can get to the bottom of something, but then I'm off to the next thing and I forgot the last thing I just learned.
Yeah.
And so then I suffer the consequences of going back through that cycle and then having to relearn it. And
Mhm.
that process eats up so much time.
Mhm. Yeah, totally. I totally see what you're saying. So you end up with that curve being a little bit softer than the peaks and like, and going a little, up and down, up and down. One of the tools that I think is that really helped me, but there's a caveat to it. But one of the tools that's really helped me is to have a narrative of story of my life that is an emotional story of my life. Like what happened when I was a child, what that meant to me, how I interpreted that as a child, how that affected me as a child. And then as I got older, and how I built layers and layers and layers on top of that. And then what were the outcomes of that? And then how did I change? How did I recognize it and change and tell that whole story? And the caveat with the story about your life that you construct is that you can tell yourself a terrible story about yourself, or you can tell yourself a good story about yourself. You can make yourself a hero, or you can make yourself a victim, or you can make yourself, a detached bystander. And probably all of those things are true at some level. But then there's a story that will make you feel powerful and good about yourself, or there's a story that will perpetually keep you feeling terrible. And so you have to be an author, and you have to decide, is this a horror story? Is this a hero story? Is this a love story? Is it, and you have to allow it to also change as you, like you said, as life kind of continues going. It's a living story. It's not just like, here was what happened to Jennifer and this is how she, came out of it or whatever, experienced it. And now it's all done. And, which is why I'm getting anxiety, because the story is not finished. And there are new things now that are giving me uh, pause and, wait a minute, what does this mean for me? And fears about my future, and fears about, w- who I am, and am I going to be there for my child, and all the, the other, all the things that that compound. So do you think that you have created a story or a narrative about yourself? And yeah, and would that help?
I think in a way, I think we talked in one podcast. You told me that like our species of human evolved from being able to tell stories.
Mm-hmm. What's
So like,
Yuval Harari says that, the historian.
and I guess, like now we know where the water is, now we know where the food is because we can remember these stories and we don't have to remember each like individual piece of information and calculate the whole thing. And what you just said kind of made me think, like I almost create stories about everything, whether that be from, personal experience or, well, I guess it's all kind of personal experience, but my whole life as a whole story up until where I'm at now, every little lesson as a story. But as those pile up, and then it kind of becomes like all this information that you have to remember again. Like you create
Yeah.
the story to consolidate all these different points of information. And then when you get too many stories, I feel like then for me, at least, I have to just try to remember the moral of the story.
Yeah.
Like what's the one liner at the end of it that I can just remember, and then trusting myself enough not to have to do all the calculations over again just to come to that. So in the moment, like if I'm having a bad day, I can just tell, I guess that's where some of my content comes from. Like I could just tell myself, let it go. It's okay.
Mm-hmm.
But before it was let it go, it's okay. It was you know, like a 20 chapter story where the ending was let it go. It's okay.
So that's like your subheading for every story is, the dragons are after me. Let it go. It's okay. Or whatever the story is, but that's your subtitle.
So when it used to take, it might take a couple hours to run through that story, or whether it might take a couple of days or weeks to like remember all the information to get to the same conclusion. Now, like going over it so many times, it's kind of like creating that new neural pathway. Like it ends in it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Just do the next thing or whatever that thing, whatever the moral of the story is, and then I can just remember that and solve whatever it is in 10 minutes rather than spending the whole day.
I think that's what the process is like you said, it's like imagining you're creating a new neural pathway. I'll never forget this. It's what I was first learning about neuroscience, that and I'm not an expert in neuroscience. I just, read a lot and love it. I think it's very fascinating. But that when you create a habit, think of it like a tree. And every time you do that habit, like smoking, for example, you smoke a cigarette, you pull it out of the pack, you light it, you put it out, you do the whole thing. Every time you do that, you are adding like a branch on that tree, or you're increasing the rings on that tree trunk. You're creating this pathway, this very worn pathway from the ritual to the feeling, to the dopamine hit or whatever you get from that, from the nicotine. And so that's why it's so hard to quit, because you're really having to uproot this massive tree that you've built over years and years and years of doing the same thing over and over and over. Light the go, smoke it, put it out, And if we understood our thought patterns like that, then we could cut them off before they get really bad, or understand why we're having a hard time breaking that pattern, and recognizing that you have to slowly build a new pattern, a new habit. I think I told you I've been waking up early and doing like weight bearing exercises and meditating and all this stuff that I want to do just to have my head clear at the beginning of the day. And it's, as much as I enjoy doing all of that, it's just like, it's not a habit yet. Not like my other habits that I have every morning. Like I get up and I make coffee and I take the dogs out and I do all that. And that can be really helpful for people to see that, that kind of neural pathway that you're talking about, building a new one. And this story, having a motto for your story that, I always survive, or let it go, or like mine is just like, everything's going to be okay. And I say that all the time. I say that to my dogs. I say that to my son. I say it to everybody, like, all the time. Like, whatever's happening, it's like, don't worry, everything's going to be okay. It's all okay. Like, the fireworks are going off and the dogs are going crazy. That's all I say. It's like, everything's okay. Everything's going to be okay. And that's how I see it. Like, in the end, the story's not over, and in the end, it'll all be okay.
That seems like a very nice bow on the topic.
Yeah. Yeah. Everything's going to be okay. Remind yourself of that. Everything will be okay. Or come up with your own little mantra, and don't forget to breathe, and tell yourself a good story about yourself and what you've gone through. Set up new habits that help you set boundaries around yourself. Get to know yourself, and then take care of yourself. And that's kind of what anxiety is basically. Think of it as a message saying, stop. You need to take care of yourself.